My husband drove me to a restaurant for our anniversary, but when we got there, he walked right past me and sat with another woman. I quietly left without a word. A week later, his new love emptied his bank account and vanished. It was supposed to be a night to remember. Our anniversary, a celebration of everything we had built over the years. The reservation had been made weeks in advance, and I could feel the anticipation as my husband, Alex, drove us through the city streets. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of how far we had come together. We'd been through so much, and this evening was supposed to be a moment of reflection. A chance to look back at all the love we had shared. I couldn't wait to spend the night with him, just the two of us. Before we dive into this story of betrayal and redemption, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this journey. If you're finding strength in these tales of empowerment and personal growth, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us continue building this supportive community. Now let's jump into the story. But as we pulled up to the restaurant, something felt off. The usual excitement I felt when I was with him started to fizzle out. I shook it off, trying to focus on the positive. We parked and Alex got out first, opening my door with a smile. He always knew how to make me feel special, especially on our anniversary. "Let's make this a night to remember," he said, holding out his hand. I smiled, taking it, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something was different. As we walked inside, I noticed that the place was buzzing with energy. Couples celebrating their own milestones, people laughing, glasses clinking. But the moment I stepped into the restaurant, something unexpected happened. I saw her. A woman, sitting at a table in the corner of the room. She was laughing and my heart sank. Her face was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place her. It didn't matter. What mattered was the way Alex looked at her. He walked ahead, pulling me along, but I noticed his pace quicken as we approached her table. I felt my breath catch in my throat. For a second I thought maybe it was just coincidence, a fleeting glance, something insignificant. But as we got closer, my heart shattered. Alex didn't stop. He walked right past me, ignoring my presence completely. I froze in my tracks, watching in stunned silence as he sat down at the table across from her. He smiled at her, a warm, inviting smile that I hadn't seen in a long time. The kind of smile I thought was reserved for me. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, unable to process what was happening. My feet felt rooted to the ground as I watched the scene unfold. He didn't even look back at me. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just him sitting there with her as if I were invisible. The woman's laughter echoed in my ears as if mocking my entire existence. How long had this been going on? Had I missed the signs? The questions flooded my mind, but none of them made sense. In that moment, a wave of coldness washed over me. I could feel my chest tightening, my stomach turning. Was this real? Was he really doing this to me? Our anniversary of all nights. I thought we were past the lies, the misunderstandings, everything that had threatened our marriage in the past. But this was a new low. I had always believed in us, in the strength of our bond. But now everything felt like a lie. I turned away, my heart sinking with every step I took. I didn't say a word to him. There was no point. What could I possibly say that would make any of this right? I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to beg him for the attention and respect I deserved. I wasn't going to stand there humiliating myself further. I walked out of the restaurant, my heart racing as I stepped into the night air. The cold wind felt like a slap against my face, but it didn't faze me. I just needed to get out. I needed to breathe. The anger and sadness swirled inside me like a storm, threatening to take me over. But I wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not now. As I got into my car, I glanced at the restaurant one last time. I could see him through the window, his back to me, laughing and talking to her as if I had never existed. I clenched my fists on the steering wheel, the tears threatening to spill. But I held them back. I wasn't going to let him see me break. Not like this. I drove aimlessly for a while, not really knowing where I was going. The streets blurred around me, just like the thoughts in my head. How had things gotten here? We had built a life together. We had dreams, plans for the future. But in one cruel moment, it all felt shattered, like a glass vase that had been knocked off the edge of a table, the pieces scattered across the floor. I pulled into a parking lot, parking the car, but I didn't get out. I just sat there staring ahead. What had I missed? How had I been so blind? I thought back to the last few months. The distant looks, the late nights at work, the excuses. Had he been seeing her for weeks? Months? Was she the reason he had been so distant, so emotionally unavailable? I wasn't sure how long I sat there, but eventually I knew I had to go home. I had to face him. I had to hear the explanation, the excuse he would offer. I had to hear him lie to me once more. But as I drove back, I couldn't help but feel something rising inside me. A feeling I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just hurt. It was anger. Pure, unfiltered anger. How dare he? How dare he betray me like this? On our anniversary, no less. When I arrived at the house, the door creaked open as I stepped inside. I found him sitting on the couch, his jacket casually thrown over the back. He looked up at me, his face expectant, as if nothing had changed. He didn't say a word. I didn't either. I just stood there for a moment, taking in the sight of him, the man I had loved for so long, the man who had just broken me. What happened? He finally asked, his voice a little too casual. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat. How could I possibly put into words what I was feeling right now? How could I explain the sense of betrayal that cut deeper than anything I had ever known? Instead, I just turned and walked to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go from here. But one thing was clear. I couldn't stay in this marriage any longer. I had been pushed to my breaking point. But even though I felt broken, something inside me told me I wasn't done. Not yet. I would make him regret this. He had no idea what was coming. The room was quiet, the sound of the clock ticking slowly marking the passage of time. I sat on the edge of our bed trying to process everything that had just unfolded. The shock was wearing off, but the pain was still fresh, a sharp ache in my chest that refused to fade. I had been with Alex for so long, it felt impossible to imagine my life without him. Our journey together was supposed to be a story of love. A story of two people who had weathered storms and come out stronger on the other side. But now, as I sat there, everything I had thought we shared seemed like a distant memory. We met in college and it felt like fate. I remember the first time we spoke, his smile was warm, his eyes kind, and there was something about him that immediately made me feel safe. He was the kind of person you could talk to for hours, and before I knew it, I found myself drawn to him in a way I had never felt before. Our connection was instant, electric, and I knew that he was the one. We laughed, we argued, we built a life together. But no matter what, we always came back to each other. Our relationship wasn't perfect. Like any couple, we faced challenges. There were times when we disagreed, when we felt distant from each other, but we always found a way to work through it. Alex was never one to shy away from a difficult conversation. He was strong, determined, and often the rock I leaned on. When things got tough, I knew I could count on him. He had always been there for me, supporting my dreams, lifting me up when I felt down. Our love was something I had always believed in. It was deep, unwavering, and genuine. We had built a life together, one that I thought was solid, one that I thought was unbreakable. We bought a house, adopted a dog, and even started talking about having children. It was everything I had ever wanted, and I thought he felt the same. The anniversary dinner we had planned was just another milestone in our journey. It was supposed to be a celebration of our years together, a reminder of how far we had come. Little did I know it was the beginning of the end. I had always trusted Alex. I had never questioned his loyalty, his love for me, or his commitment to our marriage. We were partners, and I thought we understood each other in ways that no one else could. He was my best friend, my confidant, my person. We made decisions together, shared our hopes and fears, and built a future that seemed bright and full of possibility. In my mind, we were invincible. But the moment he walked past me and sat down with that woman, everything changed. The trust that I had built so carefully over the years shattered in an instant. It was like a rug had been pulled out from under me, and I was left standing there, unsure of what to do or where to go. The image of him sitting there, smiling at her, talking to her as if I didn't exist, burned into my mind. I kept asking myself, how long had this been going on? Was I really so blind to what was happening right in front of me? All the moments that had seemed insignificant now felt like clues I had ignored. Late nights at the office, the strange texts on his phone, the way he had become distant over the past few months. I thought back to the last few weeks, trying to pinpoint where things had started to unravel. Had I missed the signs? I remembered how he had seemed so preoccupied lately, always distracted, never fully present. He would come home from work late, his mind clearly elsewhere, and I'd brush it off as stress from his job. He had always been a workaholic, so I never questioned it. But now, in the wake of this betrayal, I couldn't help but wonder if it was all a facade. If the late nights in the distance had been his way of making space for someone else. I tried to remember the good moments. The times when we were happy, when we laughed together, when everything felt perfect. But those memories seemed to fade as the reality of what had happened set in. How could I have been so naive? How could I have believed that he would never hurt me? The pain I felt wasn't just about the betrayal itself. It was about the years of my life I had invested in someone who didn't value me the way I had valued him. It was about the trust one had given him, only for him to betray it in the most public and humiliating way. I had always been someone who believed in second chances, someone who believed in the power of love to heal all wounds. But now I wasn't so sure. Could I ever forgive him for this? Could I ever trust him again after everything he had done? The questions swirled in my mind, but no answer seemed to come. All I knew was that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just pretend that nothing had happened and move on. There had to be consequences for his actions. As I sat there, my mind raced. I thought about confronting him, asking him to explain himself, but I already knew what he would say. He would lie, downplay everything, and make me feel crazy for even questioning him. I couldn't let him have that power over me anymore. I couldn't let him manipulate me into thinking that I was the one in the wrong. I had been faithful, loyal, and devoted to him, and I deserved better than this. But what did I want now? Revenge? Closure? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I couldn't let him get away with this. He needed to feel the consequences of his actions, to understand the pain he had caused. I would make him regret what he had done to me, but I would do it on my terms, in a way that would hurt him the most. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was late and he hadn't called or texted to check on me. That wasn't surprising. He probably thought I was just upset, that I'd eventually calm down and everything would go back to normal. But it wouldn't. Not this time. Tomorrow I would have to face him. I would have to hear him try to explain himself, but I would be ready. I would not be the same person who had walked into that restaurant a few hours ago. I was stronger now, more determined. And I would make sure that he knew exactly what he had lost. The house felt empty when I walked back inside. It wasn't just the physical silence. It was the absence of everything I had believed to be true. As I stood in the living room, my mind still reeling from the night's events, I could almost hear the echo of everything that had led me here. The laughter, the shared dreams, the promises. But now it felt as if those memories had turned hollow, like echoes fading into nothing. Alex hadn't called, hadn't checked on me. I knew he was likely sitting there trying to justify himself in his mind, but I couldn't bear the thought of hearing his voice right now. I needed time to think, to process. The walls seemed to close in on me as I walked through the house we had built together. Every room, every corner felt like a reminder of the life we had shared, a life I had once thought was invincible. I had always been the kind of person who believed in love, genuine, deep, unwavering love. And for years I had believed in the bond Alex and I shared. But now everything felt like a lie. I couldn't believe that the man I had shared my life with, the man I had trusted so completely, could betray me in such an unforgivable way. I went to the bedroom, sitting on the bed that had once been a place of comfort and solace. But now it felt cold. I looked at the pictures on the wall, images of us at various stages of our life together. I tried to remember when things started to change, when Alex began pulling away. I had always attributed his increasing absences to work, to stress. But now it all seemed like an excuse. How long had he been seeing her? How long had he been lying to me? The questions were endless, but the answers were nowhere to be found. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I needed to think clearly, to figure out what my next move would be. But the anger was building inside me, a storm threatening to consume everything in its path. I had always been the type to confront things head-on, to face my problems and work through them. But this was different. This was something I had never imagined. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was a public humiliation. He had done this to me in front of everyone without a care. It was as if I no longer mattered to him at all. The idea of confronting him again made my stomach turn. I knew he would try to downplay everything, minimize the situation, make me feel crazy for questioning him. But I wasn't going to let him manipulate me any longer. I had given him my trust, my loyalty, my love. And in return he had shattered everything. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just let him get away with this. He needed to understand the pain he had caused me. But how? How could I make him truly understand the weight of his betrayal? I decided to sleep on it, to give myself some time to clear my head. I knew the next day wouldn't be easy. I would have to face him, hear his excuses, and somehow find the strength to decide what I wanted to do with my future. But I wasn't ready to talk yet. I needed a plan. I needed to regain control. The next morning came too quickly. The house was still eerily quiet, and the weight of the situation felt heavier than ever. Alex hadn't come to bed last night and I couldn't bring myself to care. I knew he was probably with her, whoever she was, trying to justify his actions. I had never felt so small, so insignificant. It was like I no longer mattered to him, like I had been replaced by someone else. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the cup of coffee in front of me. My mind was swirling with thoughts, none of them making any sense. I wanted to scream, to shout at him, to demand answers. But I knew that wouldn't help. I knew that if I gave in to the rage, I would lose myself in it. I had to be smart about this. I had to think carefully. As I sat there, I realized something. Alex had always been the one in control. He had always been the one making the decisions, steering the course of our relationship. But now things had changed. I was in control. I didn't need his permission, his explanations. I didn't need anything from him anymore. The power had shifted. And in that moment, I knew that I was going to make him regret what he had done. I stood up, walking toward the living room. I needed a distraction, something to clear my mind, something to focus on other than the chaos swirling around me. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts, looking for someone to talk to. But then I stopped. I didn't want to talk to anyone. Not yet. I needed to be alone to figure out my next step. I started pacing, trying to work through the emotions that were consuming me. Anger, pain, betrayal. They all collided within me, each one more intense than the last. I had spent so many years believing in Alex, believing in us. But now everything was falling apart. And I couldn't just sit back and let him get away with it. I thought about my options. I could confront him, demand the truth, make him admit what he had done. But part of me knew that wouldn't be enough. Part of me knew that simply hearing him say the words wouldn't make the pain go away. I needed more than that. I needed to feel like I had regained control over my life, over my choices. I needed to make him feel what I was feeling, to make him understand the gravity of what he had done. The more I thought about it, the more a plan began to form in my mind. I wasn't going to let him off the hook so easily. I wasn't going to let him think that everything would just go back to normal, that he could continue with his life while I picked up the pieces of mine. No, I was going to make sure he understood what it felt like to be betrayed, to be treated like an option rather than a priority. I picked up my phone again, this time dialing a number I hadn't dialed in years. It was a number I had always kept in the back of my mind, just in case. The person on the other end picked up after a few rings. "Hey," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I need your help." I knew what I had to do. After a sleepless night, a flood of emotions and a torrent of thoughts, one truth became clear. Alex needed to feel the consequences of his actions. But I couldn't just let my anger take over. I needed to be strategic. I needed to think things through carefully so that when the moment came, the impact would be undeniable. I wouldn't be reactive. This would be methodical, calculated, and ultimately, it would leave him questioning everything he had taken for granted. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't about the woman he had been with. It wasn't just about their betrayal. It was about the way he had treated me for years. How he had dismissed my feelings, neglected my needs, and made me feel invisible. This wasn't just a love story gone wrong. This was a story of disrespect, of taking someone for granted, and I wasn't going to let it slide. He had spent months living a double life, and now it was time for him to see the cost of his actions. I took a deep breath and sat down at the kitchen table, my phone in front of me. It was time to put my plan into motion. But I needed help. That's why I had called someone from my past. The one person who understood the art of taking back control. My old friend Sarah. She was sharp, clever, and always a few steps ahead of everyone else. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I knew she would understand why I needed her now. She had always been good at navigating the chaos of life, and right now I was drowning in it. When Sarah answered the phone, I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Hey, long time no talk. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I need your help, Sarah. It's serious." She paused, probably sensing the gravity in my tone. "Of course. What's happening?" And that's when I told her everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the way Alex had completely disregarded me. I explained how I had been faithful, how I had given everything to this relationship, only for him to treat me like I didn't matter. I knew she could understand my pain. She had been through her own heartbreaks, and while I never expected her to exact revenge on my behalf, I knew she would give me the advice I needed to take action. Sarah listened carefully, offering words of support and encouragement. "You don't deserve any of this," she said softly. "But don't do anything hasty. You're smart. You got this. You just need to think about what's going to hurt him the most." Her words echoed in my mind as I hung up the phone. He was right. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my actions. I had to stay focused, stay calm, and make sure that every move I made was deliberate. I was no longer the woman who would cry and beg for his attention. No, I was going to make sure that he realized just how much he had taken me for granted. And I would do it in a way that he would never forget. I started with the basics. I knew that Alex's pride was one of his most defining characteristics. He cared about appearances, about status, about what people thought of him. I had always admired his ambition, his drive to succeed, but now I would use that against him. His ego was fragile, and that was the first thing I would target. I began by reviewing the financials. His investments, his business dealings, the accounts he had been managing for years. I wasn't just his wife. I had been his partner in many ways, helping him with decisions, advising him on matters, and understanding the intricacies of his business. It didn't take long to uncover a few discrepancies, some questionable transactions that could be exposed. It was nothing criminal, nothing that would land him in jail, but it was enough to cause a scandal. A well-timed leak, a little whisper in the right ears, and his reputation would take a major hit. The thought of it sent a surge of adrenaline through me. This was going to be my first move. I wouldn't make it public immediately. No, I would wait for the perfect moment. But that wasn't enough. I knew that he had a weakness that went beyond business. He had always valued his friends, his circle, the people who made him feel important. That was where I would strike next. Alex had always been the life of the party, the one who made everyone laugh, who charmed his way into people's good graces. But over the years I had witnessed how he treated the people closest to him, how he would belittle them when he thought no one was watching, how he would use his status to manipulate situations in his favor. I had always overlooked it, convinced that it was just a byproduct of his ambition. But now it became clear that this was another area I could exploit. I reached out to a few people from his past, former colleagues, friends, even some business partners who had been burned by him over the years. I carefully crafted my approach, asking for their help in revealing the truth about Alex's behavior. Some were hesitant, unsure if they wanted to get involved. But others, those who had been wronged by him, were more than eager to share their stories. Slowly but surely, I began to build a network of people who were willing to speak out, to expose the side of Alex that he had worked so hard to hide. And then there was the final piece of the puzzle. The woman. I didn't know her name, but I was going to find out. I wasn't sure what Alex's relationship with her was, but I needed to understand how deep this betrayal went. I needed to know if she was just a fling or if she was someone he had been seeing for a while. I couldn't just let her fade into the background. She had to be a part of this, even if she didn't realize it. If Alex thought he could have his cake and eat it too, he was wrong. She was going to learn that as well. Days passed and the plan began to take shape. Each piece fell into place with meticulous care, and as I stood back and looked at everything I had gathered, I felt a sense of power that I hadn't felt in a long time. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It wasn't about hurting him just to hurt him. It was about making him understand what it felt like to be betrayed, to be treated like an option. He had taken me for granted for far too long, and now it was time for him to feel the weight of his actions. I was no longer the woman who had cried herself to sleep, the woman who had begged for his love and attention. No, I was someone else now. I was the woman who had taken control of her own life, the woman who had learned to stand up for herself in ways she never thought possible. The storm was coming and Alex wouldn't know what hit him. The day I had meticulously planned for was finally here. Everything had fallen into place with an uncanny precision. Every move, every conversation, every decision had been carefully calculated. It felt surreal standing on the brink of what I had prepared for. A moment where I could regain everything Alex had taken from me and, in the process, remind him of his own fragility. I had kept my distance from him for the past few days. Each time I saw him, I was reminded of the man I thought I knew, the one I had trusted with my heart, my future. He had tried to reach out, his calls becoming increasingly frantic, but I ignored them all. I didn't need to hear his hollow apologies or his attempts to explain away his betrayal. The time for words had passed. What mattered now was the final act. The one that would leave him with no choice but to face the consequences of his actions. I had arranged everything carefully. The leak I'd orchestrated was timed to perfection. The documents, the transactions, the small, seemingly innocent details that would now unravel the carefully constructed world Alex had built for himself. Everything would come to light in a way that he couldn't escape. It wasn't about destroying him completely. It was about exposing his weaknesses, the parts of himself he had hidden behind a facade of charm and success. I wanted him to see how easily everything he had worked for could slip away. But as I sat in the silence of my apartment, watching the clock tick closer to the moment when it would all unfold, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't joy. It was something else entirely, an acceptance of what needed to happen. I had spent so many years giving him everything, sacrificing parts of myself, and now it was time for him to realize what that had cost me. I stood up, the weight of the moment settling heavily on my shoulders. It was time to make the call. I reached for my phone and dialed the number. It rang twice before the voice on the other end picked up. "It's done," I said, my voice steady but tinged with something I couldn't quite identify. There was a brief pause before the person on the other end responded. "You sure about this? Once it's out, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied. "It has to be done." The words I had been dreading to speak were finally out. There was no turning back now. I hung up the phone and stood there, the silence swallowing me whole. For a moment I questioned myself. Was this truly what I wanted? Was I really going to destroy everything he had built? But then I thought about the years of lies, the countless times I had stood by him, trusting him when he had done nothing but betray that trust. No, this wasn't about destruction. This was about accountability. This was about making him realize what it felt like to lose everything. The minutes stretched on, and I could feel the anticipation building, coiling tightly inside me. It wasn't until the phone buzzed that I realized I had been holding my breath. The message was short, but its impact was immediate. "The leak is out. It's happening." My heart raced as I opened the message. The documents had been sent, the truth exposed. Alex's financial dealings, his questionable business practices, all of it was now out in the open. There was no denying it now. The first domino had fallen and there was no way to stop the chain reaction. But that wasn't all. I had another card to play, the woman. The person who had been at the center of it all. I had spent the past few days digging, talking to people, piecing together the details. I had learned more about her than I cared to. She wasn't just some random fling. No, she had been part of Alex's life for longer than I had realized. And now she was about to become a pawn in my plan. I had reached out to her, under the guise of a friendly conversation. I didn't reveal who I was right away, but I played the part of someone sympathetic. Someone who was just trying to understand what had been going on. She had been more open than I expected, and through our conversation, I learned just how deep the affair had gone. She had no idea who I was at first, but when I dropped the bomb, that I was Alex's wife, the silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. I could hear her scrambling to come up with an explanation, but there was no excuse that could fix what had happened. I kept the conversation brief, but in that short amount of time, I had gathered everything I needed. I knew that Alex had underestimated me. He thought he could keep his two worlds separate, but I was about to bring them crashing together. I wasn't going to let this woman walk away unscathed. I didn't want revenge on her, not really. She was just another victim in this twisted game Alex had played. But I needed to make her understand the consequences of her actions as well. I told her that if she ever tried to contact Alex again, if she ever tried to interfere, I would make sure her name was attached to the scandal that was about to erupt. She didn't need to know all the details, but she would know enough to realize that there was no way out for her now. With the final piece in place, I waited. I sat back, watching the world begin to unravel for Alex. The emails, the texts, the whispers, all of it was coming together. He had no idea what was about to hit him. The first phone call came in an hour later. It was Alex. His voice was frantic, urgent. "What's going on? I don't understand. Why are these things being released? Who did this?" I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch between us. I wanted him to feel the weight of his own actions, to realize that his betrayal had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. "I think it's time you faced the truth, Alex. You've been lying to everyone, including me, for far too long. It's all out there now. There's no going back. I could hear him scrambling, the panic in his voice growing. But I wasn't done yet. And as for your friend, I said, letting the words sink in, you might want to rethink your relationship with her. She's going to be a part of this whether she likes it or not. There was a long pause. I could hear the blood rushing in his ears, feel the dread creeping up on him. And that was when I knew I had won. Not because of the damage I had caused, but because for the first time in years I had taken control. The tables had turned and Alex had nowhere to hide. The revenge wasn't just about making him pay for what he had done. It was about reminding myself that I had a voice, that I was worth more than the lies he had fed me. And as I listened to his frantic attempts to salvage what was left of his reputation, I knew that this moment, this final act, was not just his downfall. It was my redemption. The silence that followed Alex's frantic calls was deafening. He had finally realized the magnitude of what was happening, and I could almost feel the panic rising in him with each passing moment. His voice had trembled, his usual confidence gone, replaced by desperation. He was trying to salvage something, anything, but I could hear in his words that it was already too late. He couldn't fix this, couldn't undo the damage that had been done. The power had shifted and I was no longer the one waiting for him to apologize. I wasn't waiting for him to explain himself. I had taken control and the pieces were falling into place faster than he could process. I could feel the satisfaction of knowing that Alex would never look at his life the same way again. The foundation he had built, his career, his status, was crumbling, and it wasn't because of a single mistake. It was because of his repeated disregard for those around him, the years of manipulating and lying that had finally caught up with him. I had carefully exposed every crack in his world and now they were breaking open. He was no longer untouchable, no longer the powerful figure he had once been. The tide had shifted, and now it was his turn to experience the consequences of his actions. But even in the midst of this victory, there was a part of me that felt strangely empty. I had gotten what I wanted, revenge, justice, whatever you wanted to call it, but at what cost? What had all of this really brought me? I had spent so much time focused on making Alex regret his choices that I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. There were no more plans to make, no more moves to set in motion. Everything was done, everything was exposed, and now all that was left was the aftermath. I thought about the woman, the one Alex had been seeing behind my back. I had done everything I could to make her understand the role she played in this mess, but now I wasn't sure what to think of her. Was she just a pawn, an unwitting participant in Alex's deception, or was she just as much to blame as he was? I didn't have the answers, but I didn't need them anymore. She would be left to deal with the fallout just as much as he would. Neither of them would get away unscathed. It wasn't long before I realized that the destruction I had set into motion wasn't just about Alex. It was about me too. For the first time in a long while, I realized that I had been holding on to this pain, this need for retribution, as a way of holding on to a version of myself that no longer existed. I wasn't the same person who had entered that restaurant on our anniversary, who had quietly walked away without a word. That woman was gone. The betrayal had broken her, but in doing so, it had also given birth to someone stronger. Someone who didn't need Alex to define her, someone who didn't need his approval or his love to feel whole. I spent the following days in a fog, watching as Alex tried to pick up the pieces of his life, but nothing could stop the inevitable. His reputation, once untouchable, was in ruins. The documents I had leaked had caused enough of a stir to expose his dishonest dealings, and the people who had once been loyal to him were now turning their backs. He had never imagined that someone like me, the woman who had always stood by him, could bring his empire crashing down. But it wasn't just the scandal that hurt him. It was the realization that he had lost me for good, and that was something he could never fix. I didn't reach out to him again. I didn't need to. The silence between us was deafening, but I found peace in it. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I no longer felt trapped by the memories, by the lies, or by the expectations I had placed on myself. The house felt different, but not in a bad way. It felt like my space again, a place where I could start over, where I could begin to heal from the damage Alex had caused. But the road to healing wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. Was I justified in destroying his life? Was there a way to have gotten closure without going so far? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about punishing him. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back the control that he had stolen from me. I had been a silent participant in my own life for far too long, allowing him to dictate the terms of our relationship, allowing him to shape the narrative. But now I was writing my own story and it felt empowering. As the weeks passed, I began to feel like myself again. I started doing things for me, things I had put on hold for years because I had always prioritized Alex and his needs. I rediscovered old hobbies, went out with friends, and even took a spontaneous trip to the coast, something I had always wanted to do but never had the chance to. It was liberating, to be in control of my own happiness, to not rely on someone else's approval for my sense of self-worth. It wasn't easy though. There were days when I still missed the version of Alex that I had fallen in love with, the man who had made me feel special and cherished. But the more I let go of the idealized version of him, the easier it became to see him for who he really was. The man I had loved was never as perfect as I had imagined him to be. The man I had trusted had been capable of far more deception than I had ever realized. I never saw Alex again after that final confrontation. He tried to reach out, tried to explain himself, but I didn't respond. I didn't need his words anymore. I had moved on, and in doing so I had found a new sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I felt like I was walking it on my own terms. As for Alex, he never truly recovered from the fallout. He lost his reputation, his friends, his career, everything he had once taken for granted. But I couldn't feel sorry for him. He had made his choices and now he had to live with the consequences. I, on the other hand, had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. In the end, that was all that mattered.